Hello YouTube again. Alright, so today, I shake my head. Today we're going to take the, change the studs on this side to the longer studs so we can put the Prostar on there. And then I'm going to go over how I lowered the car with the springs and put the double adjustable shocks in there. That's what we're going to do today. Okay, so I got the wheel off, I got the brake caliper off. When you do this, you're better off taking the brake caliper off, setting it out of the way. If you don't have a way to set it up there like this car does, then just try to get some zip ties and zip tie it out of the way somewhere, because now if you have a really long brake line, you might be able to get away with it, but I wouldn't chance it. Because that's a lot of weight coming down when that comes down. But anyway, the first thing to do is take the shock out. There's one bolt there. There's two bolts on the bottom. And it slides out the bottom. You just slide it right out the bottom. And then what you want to do is put a jack right underneath the lower control arm there to hold everything. And then you're going to take that upper ball joint nut off, take the cotter pin out, and then take the nut off. And then you can lower your jack down, and this whole thing should drop down. Now sometimes it won't. Sometimes the ball joint's kind of stuck in the hole. You can just stick something in there and pry on it, get that to pop loose. You'll have to lower your jack a little bit to pop that loose. And well, no, not probably. You just pry it, it should come loose. But once you get that loose, then you slowly, I'd move out of the way. Don't stand like right here where I'm at. I'd get over here in the angle and then lower your jack down as far as it'll go. And that spring liable to jump out at you, so that's why you don't want to stand here. But once you get the control arm all the way down, then you can pry that spring out. And I tell you right now, it's not easy to pry it out. I had to use a really big pry bar. Now, when you cut these, that spring goes up in there and it sits around a round piece. So that's the part you want to cut. You want to cut the top. This side is a little bit less round. And this side, I don't know if you can, but the end of that spring, which is right there at the bottom where that light's shining, but you can't see the end of it. Let's see. Can't see the end of it there too, but there's a little groove right there. Right there's the end of that spring right there. Actually, that's farther back than it should be. It needs to be turned clockwise just a little bit more, but as long as you're around them two holes right there when you put that back in, which really sucks, man, because when you're trying to pry that in, it's hard to get that end of the spring over that lip right there at the end. It'd be easier if it was down on this side. It'd pop in a lot easier, but I'm sure it's made that way for a reason, so it holds in there better. It'll probably hold in better at the top, but yeah. That end of that spring should actually be covering both of those holes. It's twisted around on me a little bit, but that's good enough. But here's the double adjustable shocks that we put in it, and I don't know about this because, see, there they are. It's hard to get your fingers in there, but you can get your fingers in there and turn them. So, but anyway, when you cut these springs, I just used an angle grinder and put a cutoff wheel on it and cut them. But when you cut them, don't do a whole bunch at once, because I think this car, I cut off a coil and a half and it lowered it a good 3 inches. So I was reading online that if you measure it, if you want to go down 2 inches, cut 1 inch off of it. And you gotta, it's kind of hard to measure them because when you set them on a table, they don't want to set up straight, but you want to try to, some people just cut a half a coil at a time until they find out where they're at. But I wouldn't recommend that. I'd do like that one thing said at one side I read, if you want to go down in 2 inches, cut 1 inch off the coil. But I wound up cutting a coil and a half off this. That coil was real too long. And then so I wanted to explain something more on cutting these springs. This is just an old front spring I had from old stock shocks that went on that car. But anyway, it's the same idea. That's actually the top on this particular, on that car, on the front springs. But anyway, on the 80 Trans Am, it's the bigger top coil that you want to cut. So I'm just going to use this as a reference. When I was saying cut 1 inch off the spring and it'll lower the car 2 inches, I wasn't meaning like an inch that way. I was meaning 1 inch this way. See, like on this one, I don't know if you can see that or not, but cutting 1 full coil off on this spring is exactly 1 inch. I don't know how good you can see that. So if I cut that right there, it'd be 1 inch. But now, when you start going around and say you needed 1.5 inches, you got to keep in mind you're measuring from this highest point. So you can set it on the table and make sure you're straight up and down and then measure. But say for instance, that was the highest point. If we wanted 1.5 inches, then we'd cut about 1.25 inches of a coil off on this particular spring. So right there's 1.5 inches. I'd cut there. So if you want to go down 1 inch, just start cutting 1 inch first. Put the spring back in. See where you're at. See how much it lowered it. And then you can do some math. You know, 1 inch lowered it, 1.5 inches. So now you know where you can go from there. So if you need to go another 1.5 inches, take another inch off of it. But measuring from the highest point down, So if we wanted 2 inches, and let's say that was our highest point, because we're going off that highest point right there, that corner, and we're just going to say, I'm just guesstimating. I could set this on the table and, but you just run it around. It'd probably be easier to stand this up. Make sure you got the coil 90 degrees to the table, and then measure the coil as you go around. And when you hit 2 inches, make you a mark there, and then hit the cut if you wanted to go 2 inches. But I just wanted to kind of explain that a little bit more. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully I explained it halfway decent. Something real bad about this too is, look, that's all the room you have in there, and none of the spring compressors I could find at Advance would fit in there to do that. So I had someone help me with that, help me pry those in there, and it took a lot of, we had a jack down here, we had a jack over there, and we was just prying and fooling with it, and it took us a long time to get this side in, but once we figured it out, the other side we got it in pretty good. But once you got it cut and back in there, then you want to check everything. You don't have to put the shock back in it to check it. You can just, you don't really even have to put the bolt in there, but put your ball joint back through the hole, put the tire on it, put a couple of bolts on it, and set it back down and see where you're at. If it ain't low enough, take you some measurements and just do it all over again. Cut it, put it back in there, and check it again. Once you're done, put your spring in there, and then you can put your shock back in. Again, it goes through the bottom. You got to kind of have the car pretty high to get it in from the bottom. And again, 1 bolt up here, 2 bolts down here. And then put your upper ball joint back in, and screw it back on. Put your cotter pin back in. Put your brake caliper back on, and you're done. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take this rotor off. It's pretty simple. Just put a screwdriver in there, hammer it in there just a little, and then kind of wedge it with a screwdriver and wedge it all the way around, pop that out. And then there's a cotter pin and a nut in there. Take the cotter pin out and unscrew the nut, which the nut It's never that tight because you're not supposed to tighten those real tight, because then your bearings, they get binded up. But that's why I'm going to do that now, and then we're going to take that rotor over on the bench and knock those studs out. So I barely tapped in there. Don't tap in there real far, because you just barely want to tap it too. But don't go real far, because if you put a hole in that ledge in there, you've ruined it. Then you just pry it around. And eventually it'll pop off. Ta-da. And then you just take that cotter pin out. You just straighten it up here and then pull it out with vice grips or needle nose or whatever. Take that bolt off. There's a bolt, a washer, and a bearing. And there's a bearing in the back. But once you take that bolt off, you slide everything out. Just try not to get that on the ground. That bearing and stuff, you want to keep those as clean as possible, because dirt and grime in your bearing ain't a good thing. But I'm going to take that off, pull the rotor off, and take it over to the bench. And there we go, we got it off. I put the nut, washer, and the bearing up there inside the dust cover and just set it up there, and then I got the cotter pin sitting there. But also, that washer, it has like a little tongue on it, and that tongue has to go in that groove. Anyway, there we go. We'll take the rotor over and knock those wheel studs out and put the other ones in. Alright, on these studs, when you knock them out, what I usually do is I just put the nut back on there. Sometimes, I like to say bolt a lot. Sometimes I'll call nuts bolts. Don't blame me, don't mind. But anyway, I'll put those on there, and then I take a big hammer and I hit right there and knock them out. Try not to hit here, but try to give it one good hard whack. There we go. That one's out. Then you got to kind of pull up on it and twist to get your nut off. And then just do all 5 of them. Or 4, or however many you got. But I'll get all those knocked off, and then we'll put those in it. And I'll show you how I was using that tool, which I'm not going to use that tool because those strip out too easy. I don't know why those strip out so easy, but I use that tool on all 10 of those, and I have no problem at all. And like I said, I got it too big of a knurl on these to go through the hole, and I put that impact on there, and I had it wide open for 5-10 seconds to pull those through, and it pulled them through, but it didn't strip nothing out. Bolt came right, the nut came off just fine. On these right here, when I was using that tool, and I'll show you how I use it in a minute, but I was just going like that. I wasn't holding it wide open like I did on these front stock top ones. And then those were the right size. I just bump those through. But those weren't the right size. I had to hold that impact. It's a Bauer Electric, I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't know I forgot what the strength was on that, but yeah, when I pulled those through, man, I held it wide open for a good 5-10 seconds to pull those through. I barely even bumped it trying to pull those through, and it stripped the nut to the bolt. And I couldn't unscrew the nut. I had to fight and fight. I had to hold that impact wide open in reverse to unscrew them, and then screw them down, then unscrew them, then screw them down, and unscrew them until I got it far enough to where I could get my angle grinder in there and cut them out, which was a pain in the butt. But anyway, I'll go over how I use that here in a minute. All right, got them all out. So I got the new long studs. Stick those in there. Feed it through the hole. See if I can do this with one hand. All right. And that goes over that like that. Then you take the nut. I'll hold this while I do this. Put the nut on there. There we go. Now, one important thing when you're doing this is make sure you're straight before you start trying to pull that through there. But I'm actually going to go ahead and try it. I'm just not going to use the impact on it. I'm just going to use the ratchet and socket. And that nut kind of goes down in the hole a little bit further. And I like it too, but and just look at it from the front and the back, see how it moves around. You want to make sure you get it good and straight. It's easier to look at it from the back to see how straight you are. It's not perfectly straight, but I'm gonna get it perfectly straight and try the ratchet on it and see if we can pull it through with that. I got the first one in there. I just beat it in from the back. I didn't want to take a chance on stripping the nut and bolt again. Plus, I couldn't turn the ratchet and hold the rotor at the same time. It was too hard. But there it is. That one's in. And now I gotta beat the rest of them in. I've only got 2 more where I stripped them other ones out. So this is my son's car. He ordered another 5-pack. It's supposed to be here today, but we'll go ahead and put these 3 in. And then I'll wait on that other pack to come in while I'm doing that. Like I said, there was a rear one that stripped out on the passenger side there, so I can mess with that. And then he got Moser studs for that. I got me a little cheap GoPro 3, Hero 3. I was going to use it, but the battery was dead, so I'm charging it up right now. But yeah, we're going to put those Mosers, or put a Moser in it for now. And yeah, he's got rally wheels that the slicks are on, old rally wheels. That's what he uses for slicks, like 26 by 10 M&H Race Masters. But I'm gonna put those tires on it too, and then put the other Prostar on there and see how it sets. I know it's gonna set too low because them skinnies say 24 by 4 or whatever, but I just measured them and they're like 23 3/8. I measured these and they're 25 5/8. So I might just buy some of those and put on there, but those are bias ply, and with the radials on the front, the full big radials, they're sitting over there. There's one of them. When we lowered the tire pressure to get the bias plies to hook real good, it was walking real bad up top, and he didn't like that, so he wants to put bias ply on the front, but those are radials. But even with radials up front and bias ply in the back, if they're skinnies, you don't get that much walk anyway. But you're supposed to have, if you got bias ply, you're supposed to have bias ply all the way around. If you have radials, you're supposed to have radials all the way around. So I guess he's going to buy some 27. Well, we ain't figured it out yet, either the 26 or 27 by 4 bias ply front runners to go on that. But I'm gonna get these 3 in, wait on that package to come, then I'm gonna go out there and take that tire, rear passenger tire off, and change the stud on it. They got stripped out. I got all 3 of those beat in there good. They're all seated real good. They're nice and straight. I made this little thing, I put holes in it. I was using the edge of this and beating on it, but once you get 3 bolts in there. It's kind of hard to hold it on that ledge, so I just got a 2x4 and drilled some holes in it. That one's through the hole, and then I'll beat this one in next, and it'll go into the hole in the board. That way that can stay centered somewhat on the board so it don't jump around on me too much. But yeah, waiting on the other package to come from the other 2 that I stripped out. They look nice and seated to me. So while I'm waiting on that, they're supposed to be here today. I'm gonna go change the stud in the rear of that one, and maybe take the torque arm and anti-roll bar out of this one. I'm not sure if I'll do that today or tomorrow. I ordered that anti-roll bar, I don't know, a week ago, and it still ain't shipped. I guess they have to make those to order. I don't know. It said in stock. I don't know what's the hold up on that. That should have been here already, I thought, but we'll go ahead and get that rear stud changed, and if I got time, I'll probably take the torque arm and anti-roll bar out of this one.